Lesson 9, be kind to our language. This is a really important one to me, so I hope others understand the significance of this. Avoid pronouncing the phrases everyone else does. Think up your own way of speaking, even if only to convey that thing you think everyone is saying. Make an effort to separate yourself from the internet. Read books. Please read books. Get familiar with source materials. Go to the primary sources. Don't have all of your information distilled to you from a talking head or an influencer, right? Engage with multiple sources. Engage with the other perspectives' point of view. Read books. Reading books forces you to go on. The process of reading forces you to go through a discovery process, which is critical for understanding. And understanding and knowledge are two different things. You can have knowledge about an event, but understanding the event means you have the greater context of everything. So I know that it's not people's favorite thing to be lectured and to be told that they need to read more, but it is really, really important right now. But also beyond that is understanding language itself and understanding rhetoric. Okay, because Victor Klemperer, a literary scholar of Jewish origin, turned his philological training against Nazi propaganda. He noticed how Hitler's language rejected legitimate opposition. Sound familiar? The people always meant some people and not others. An American president says, my people. Encounters were always struggles. An American variant is winning. And any attempt to understand the world in a different way was defamation of the leader, or, as an American president puts it, treason. And this is so, so important. We'll get into some of the specific examples. There's a lot of really great books here. These books would be perfect for reading. But the point here has to do with rhetoric. And I want people to understand some of these concepts a little bit better. So when Trump tweets, right, and think about language in this context, right, it's not just the speeches, it's not just the policies, it's the tweets, it's the backhand things, it's what they're not saying, it's what they refuse to answer, right? It's their attacks on journalists, right? When the president gets asked questions about the actions that he's taking, some of these are just the first questions that you should ask a president when he enters into a war, for example. And he assumes that he's being criticized. It's probably because he knows that he did something wrong. The journalist isn't attacking him or targeting him. He did something wrong, and we're just trying to get the facts of the matter down. But this is also, the escalating Christian nationalist rhetoric, the increasingly more dehumanizing language about immigrants or even just Democrats, right? Or, any questions that he doesn't like must come from a low IQ person, right? Or that's Democrat hoax, fake news, right? All of these things chip away at truth. More than half a century ago, the classic novels of totalitarianism warned of the domination of screens, the suppression of books, the narrowing of vocabularies, and the associated difficulties of thought. In Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, published in 1953, firemen find and burn books, while most citizens watch interactive television. In George Orwell's 1984, a personal favorite of mine, highly recommend reading, published in 1949, books are banned and television is two-way, allowing the government to observe citizens at all times. In 1984, the language of visual media is highly constrained to starve the public of the concepts needed to think about the present, remember the past, and consider the future. One of the regime's projects is to limit the language further by eliminating ever more words with each edition of the official dictionary. So in the book, they provide, kind of like, volume 12 of the Oxford Dictionary or whatever, right? Which with each edition of the dictionary, they remove more and more words to continuously limit even the learning of more words, to limit language. When we repeat the same words and phrases that appear in the daily media, we accept the absence of a larger framework. To have such a framework requires more concepts, and having more concepts requires reading. So get the screens out of your room and surround yourself with books. The characters in Orwell's and Bradbury's books could not do this, but we still can. And I'm going to do this. What to read? Any good novel enlivens our ability to think about ambiguous situations and judge the intentions of others. Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov and Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being might suit our moment. One novel known by millions of young Americans that offers an account of tyranny and resistance is J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. If you or your friends or your family did not read it that way the first time, then it bears reading again. Some of the political and historical texts that inform the arguments made here are Politics in the English Language by George Orwell, The Language of the Third Reich by Victor Klemperer, The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt, The Rebel by Albert Camus, The Captive Mind by Czesław Milosz, The Power of the Powerless by Václav Havel, How to Be a Conservative Liberal Socialist by Leszek Kolakowski, The Uses of Adversity by Timothy Garton Ash, The Burden of Responsibility by Tony Judt, Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning, and Nothing is True and Everything is Possible by Peter Pomerantsev. And so again, just to recap, because I think I want to make sure that I hammer this home, like to make this very clear. We've seen, right, the way that the Trump regime has wanted to ban books already. Certain books, certain topics, right, particularly, in that LGBTQ plus sphere, but also beyond that as well. Banning books throughout the country has been something that this regime openly does. The narrowing of vocabularies, right? The acceptable language or concepts that you can, or positions on those concepts, they're restrained by what Trump approves or disapproves of. The associated difficulties of thought, like Trump lies a lot. The statistics it doesn't look like they've been updated in his second term, and it would be astounding to see what that was. Just the State of the Union address alone was almost all a lie. But he was averaging something like 27 lies per day at the end of his first term. That is insane. From a sitting president to outright lie on average 27 times per day. That's astounding. So just all, things to consider. All right, I know that this might be a little bit jarring, the different setting and different clothes. I thought I could do this in one evening, and I couldn't. So picking up where I left off, or rather to recap lesson 9, I didn't feel like I did this one justice. So I am going to tee it up like this. This might be my favorite of all of the lessons, and I can't overstate its value. I particularly like the way that he framed this. Think up your own way of speaking, even if only to convey the thing you think everyone is saying, or avoid pronouncing the phrases everyone else does. And I like that because I think if you are saying the same words, if you're pronouncing the phrases everyone else does. There's a good chance that means you don't have your own interpretation of the situation, which I think implies a level of lack of understanding, that you've accepted someone else's story and using their language. Even if you're right, it's still critical to understand why. And I think putting it into your own language, kind of avoiding the phrases everyone else is using, finding your own voice, is another way of saying you understand it in your terms and you can communicate it in your terms. So he goes on to talk about how Victor Klemperer turned his philological training against Nazi propaganda. He noticed how Hitler's language rejected legitimate opposition. And it's important to note this, and noticed how Hitler's language had some specific characteristics. And it's the same for Trump too. People aren't, I think it's gone grossly unaccounted for just how bad Trump's rhetoric actually is. He has used direct quotes, some of the most explicitly direct references to the same language that Hitler was using, calling his perceived enemies rodents, cockroaches. He's trying to dehumanize certain populations. And any attempt to understand the world in a different way than Trump or authoritarian leaders broadly, anything that goes against their narrative is defamation. Or Trump will say, you are a low IQ person. It's fake news. It's a Democrat hoax. All of these different things, only his narrative is permitted to exist. And you're seeing that also in his cronies in the rest of the regime, clearly at his direction, refusing to contradict his narrative of things, even in situations where these people are testifying under oath. It's a huge tell. It obviously shows where their priorities are. And that also, right, I would say the lack of language, right, where you choose to be silent is just as valuable of a lesson here, right? The avoidance of certain questions, the intentionally missing the point of a question, intentionally selectively choosing which parts of a question to answer, right? We've seen it so much from Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, Mike Johnson, like high-ranking officials in our government refuse to answer basic questions, yes or no questions. They refuse to acknowledge truth. They refuse to acknowledge the validity of legal interpretations. Their intentions here are to undermine our legal system, to instill distrust in our government, and quite clearly to avoid incriminating themselves because they are engaging in criminal activities. I also want to add some of the most aggressive things. The idea of domestic terrorism, right, which they are broadly applying to a number of situations. And the point is, they're not actually, a lot of the times, even crimes. They're using this claim of domestic terrorism, which is an insanely intense accusation. That is, those are federal crimes, very serious ones. And the number of times that they've made those claims and the claims turn out to be completely false, not based in any reality, zero evidence of domestic terrorism applied to these people, their names exposed, right? That's language used in an intentional way to intimidate dissent, to promote their narratives, and to deter others from taking actions that might be deemed domestic terrorism in the eyes of this administration in the future. So horrible, horrible thing there as well. It's also very evident in Trump's nicknames for people. Crooked so-and-so or spineless whatever. Think about how insane that is, that our sitting president treats people like that, calls people like no respect at all. It's insane.